Um, Thank you all who joined, and thank you all who are participating. So, quick run of the land. We're going to do the roundtable, and then we're going to switch over to a Q&A session towards the end. At that point, we'll encourage those who are asking questions in real time to turn their camera on and join the conversation. As mentioned before, we're going to be using the Zoom chat, so feel free to drop in your LinkedIn or anything else you want to share with the broader group. Also, I want to encourage, although we will have a Q&A session, if mid-conversation you want to add your 2 cents or have a question, please drop it in there. I will do my best to be monitoring that and bringing those questions into the conversation as we can in real time. So let's kick this off. First, let me do just a quick bit of introductions. I'm Colin Barnhart. I'm the founder and CEO of Black Ink Business Services. We've been around for 19 years now. We are a client advisory service firm. That's a fancy way of saying that we are an outsourced back office for our clients. We do everything from day-to-day bookkeeping up through fractional CFO work for our clients. We work with for-profit and nonprofit organizations. I've also in the past been a board member on a couple different charities. I'm also currently a board member on 2 different 501c4s. So hopefully I can bring some of my experiences to the table around that and around the finance aspect of nonprofits, which I think we will definitely be talking a lot about today. Sandy is going to be helping co-host with me today. He is the executive director of Children's Rights. Children's Rights is a advocacy group that is, I'm gonna do a layman's version of this. Sandy can do a better job of it for sure. They help advocate for kids in care through the legal system itself. So they will sue states on behalf of the children that are in care to make sure that they are making change in the way the systems works. Moving down, we have Chasen. Chasen is in the Hudson Valley. He has a very interesting organization where he is helping people that are at risk get a job in the hospitality industry. He is providing training as well as a place to work while they train and gives them the foundation to lift themselves up. Tasha is the founder and executive director of Merrill's Safe Haven, which helps kids who are in care when they start aging out, gives them a stepping stone and a place to go when they've aged out of the system. I'll let her definitely speak more about that. We have Nicole, who is the founder and executive director of EEFA, because I will not try to say all those words back to back, a lot of E's. She also has a for-profit arm of her organization that advocates for the endometriosis. Did I pronounce that right, Nicole? No, I did not.
Endometriosis.
Endometriosis. I almost had it right. I apologize. And she also advocates on the policy side to make sure that the policy is changing to have patients access care a lot easier. Jesse is the founder and president of Heroic Hearts, and he's a veteran himself who works with a lot of veterans to help advocate for mental health care, especially in the growing area of psilocybin and psychoactive drugs to help them move along. So that is our group as a whole. We're going to share these bios in the chat real quick. So I encourage everyone to go look at that and read along so you can get to know this group a little bit better. Sandy, I'm going to kick off with you. First question I have for you to sort of kick off the questions is your background came from corporate law and private equity, and we're very much on that side, and you pivoted over to the nonprofit world. Since running Children's Rights, what were some of the things that you took, especially around financial discipline and some of those core competencies that you had there that you brought into your organization? And what are still some of the things that surprise you about how the for-profit versus nonprofit world works around financial discipline?
Yeah, thank you, Colin, and thanks to this impressive, illustrious group of fellow panelists. The work you do is just incredible, and it's been a pleasure to learn about that work. Let me just say that one of the things that I really learned pretty early on, and through some mistakes as well, is that every strategic decision you make in the nonprofit space has a big financial implication. And I think there's a tendency in our world to be mission driven, which we should be, but not really modeling the financial impact of our decisions a year, 2 years, 5, 7 years out. And the consequence of doing that with discipline is that sometimes you have to say no, and you have to say no to things that are deeply aligned with your mission, but are not aligned with where you are as an organization. The cycle of your organization is really, really important. So that's been one lesson that I carry forth from the world of financial modeling and private equity and thinking about having the resources and the infrastructure to grow. One of the things that has been surprising in the nonprofit sector, as I've talked to others, is the tendency to use every dollar either for the mission or for growth. And there's a beautiful narrative around that and around growth. And funders love the narrative around growth. But what they don't do well is think about building reserves and building infrastructure. So I've been very disciplined at Children's Rights about making sure that every sort of extra dollar, additional dollar that we bring in is put in a reserve that we could draw on in lean times, and thinking about that reserve in 12 to 24 months, and even beyond that, if we could do that. And again, what that means is not chasing the latest trend, not chasing the fundraising dollars, but thinking very clearly about whether you have the means, the infrastructure, and the wherewithal to grow at the scale that your funders may want you to grow.
To just touch on that a little bit further, your donors are investing in a change of system, right? The end goal is that a law gets changed or someone is held accountable. How do you reach out to those donors, get them inspired about something that could be years in the making?
Yeah, let me just say that it's a perennial challenge for us. I talk about the backpack story, where I went to talk about deep systemic change at Children's Rights that was impacting hundreds of thousands of kids at a time. And I thought I had pitched this donor, and this donor says to me, "But we fund backpacks for foster kids, and that's what we want to do." And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a direct impact. It improves those kids' lives. But it's very hard to tell the story about systemic change that can take 4 to 5, 7, 8 years. And the only way to do that is to really have clear conversations with donors about ROI, the return on investment. And when we can say that the change that we are making is generational, that makes a difference, because the change we make not only impacts the kids that are in the child welfare system today, but the ones who would come after that and the ones who will come after that. And when you multiply that, that's huge scale. So you're impacting hundreds of thousands of lives at the same time. And we've estimated over time that in our time as an organization, we've helped improve the lives of about 3 million kids. So opening the eyes of donors to that type of scale is really, really important, because I think the tendency is to see a direct result from your grant or your gift, very immediately. And that's not the reality for the work we do. So it's a constant educational process. The other thing I would say very quickly is that we have an event, and it's very, very successful, but it's also a detriment because it's very transactional. And so it's very hard to then educate those donors about the long-term systemic impact of the work, because they come in because someone bought a table, et cetera. So that work is really hard, and it's really a challenge to connect with those people and keep them in the fold beyond the particular event.
And Keisha, I'm going to kick it to you a little bit here, just because you guys have some obvious alignment on the population you're trying to touch. Can you expand on some of the things that Sandy has talked on and how your organization approaches some of that? Because you also you have a long lead of results.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Sandy said is true. It's not just what's happening on an everyday and the impact of like immediate work that's happening. For us, we have to also think about the young adult beyond our care. And so for a young person to come into our care, anywhere between the ages of 18 and 24, we're thinking about the trauma that they're coming with, but also how do we, in some ways, prepare them for adulthood as it is now. And then when they transition out of our program, our ultimate goal is to ensure that they're able to transition out into permanent housing. But one of the things that we talk about is adulting 101, kind of coming down to how they engage with their peers of what does it mean to have to do some of these things for yourself. And a lot of people talk about financial education, not just for nonprofits, but for young people and for families, especially because we work in residential spaces, is understanding what does it mean to kind of put that 5% aside or 30% aside as an organization. We're talking about that reserve that I'm sure comes pretty nicely in hand at 30 years of our children's rights. Merrill Safe Haven has existed for just over 3 years. We started in 2022, and so we are building it as we're writing it. And we're talking about how do we go beyond the next year, and we just created our first strategic plan. And we're thinking about how we provide support to adults as we're continuing to learn more about the impact that the system has had on them, very directly and indirectly.
Colin, if I can jump in for a second,
Please.
what Sandy said something in the very beginning, and Tasha actually commented on it as well. But it's so important to understand that running a nonprofit's like running a business, and that what is the stat now? Something like 67% of all nonprofits fail in the first 5 years. And it's having those standards of how you operate and having that vision in hand of what you're going to do, not just now, not just to get through this month, this year, but long-term vision and how you're going to build, which is going to make the difference in how you grow, but also where you stand in 5 years and 6 years and beyond. So it sounds like Sandy's done a really good job over the 30 years of building that plan, building that strong foundation, and making that happen.
Yeah, and Chasen, I would say that very quickly, one of the disadvantages of nonprofits is the very term nonprofit, because the reality is nonprofit organizations should be building profits. We don't have to call it that, but there should be years when you have a surplus. And the question is, what do you do with that surplus, right? And making sure that you're accumulating enough funds to do the growth in the right way that a funder may ask you to do, or to be prepared for lean times, which will come at some cycle in the future.
Absolutely.
I would say I taught as a faculty member, I taught a management and leadership course in the nonprofit sector. And many things that I found in that textbook, and I've worked in a nonprofit my entire career, it's just not enough. Right, we're taught about how you operate, how to make mission and vision align, and how to be consistent with that and avoid mission drift. But there's so much that happens that is so connected to being just, as you said, Chasen, business savvy. That is not for a lot of people nonprofit savvy, because you're also trying to survive. You're trying to avoid becoming one of those statistics of 67%, right? And that goes beyond what you're really taught as someone operating a nonprofit.
I also think it can be a little bit detrimental, though, to just make the apples to apples comparison as like a for-profit business. Like, obviously, financial responsibility and being efficient and all this kind of stuff, but there are certain dynamics of nonprofits that are very different from a for-profit. And so if donors just look at it like a for-profit, it always leaves nonprofits in a very hard situation. For instance, when you put out grants, oftentimes, if you need to hire somebody new or operational costs, those can always be tricky points for donors. For us, we serve veterans, so they want the money go directly to the veterans. And so then you have to either bake that into the overall costs, or you have some donors that are, hey, these are just operational funds. We know how nonprofits work. There's a big difference between donors that understand nonprofits versus those that don't. So there is this education side that it's not an apples to apples comparison, because salaries, operation costs, these are always the hardest things to work for, and especially in the early phases of nonprofits versus a for profit. The nonprofit has to actually show success before it has the money to show success. It's
Right.
almost this sort of like catch 22. Like you have to show, I had to show that veterans were getting help from us before people give us money for that. Right. And so it's, especially in this early stages, it is the struggle that you really don't have to, you have to outperform without the necessary funds. And you see this in a lot of chat forums of, there is a high, I would argue, a higher burnout rate within nonprofits, because everybody has to wear a million hats. Everybody has to like give above and beyond. Nonprofits really lend itself to people putting in tremendous amount of hours, oftentimes less compensation than the broader market of what they could do comparably. So I do think there is an education of, yes, like fiduciary responsibility and management and all this kind of stuff, but we also need to educate that the time scale, the funding scale, the expectations of nonprofits are different. If I have a startup, I'm showing success, potentially I could get private equity or something like that to put in big cash. They're going to understand I need to hire engineers, I need to do all this kind of stuff. You're not getting that same sort of timeline with nonprofits. You have to earn each step of the way, and oftentimes you have to show the results before you can justify hiring the person, which is always this tricky sort of challenge.
As somebody early on, from a volunteer RAM Foundation, very early stage, we've only been around about almost 2 years. My question to you guys would be, to anybody who does have like full-time employees working or taking a salary themselves, when did you hit that turning point, and like what was it that said, okay, I'm at a point where I can hire a full-time employee, and how did you know that you could afford it in the long run?
I'll say this for us, we're just now to the point where we're going to be bringing people on to hire them. And it's a crossover between offering a stipend to the people going through our training program. So actually giving them, while they're in the training, financial ability to hold their own, and then living wage jobs as they get through the program, but also the people that are involved in the program. But we've been all volunteers since 2022 as well. So that juxtaposition for us was necessity. In order for us to grow, in order for us to get to the next level, we need to do these things. So how do we fund that? So taking it from the back end when we do our budgets and look backwards, okay, we need to be here. So how do we get there? And then having those, just like I do in my business outside of this and my personal life, having multiple revenue streams and funneling that all in and seeing what that really looks like over time, so that you're not guesstimating. This is really what we've been getting from merch. This is really what's been coming in from our monetized YouTube channel. This is really what's coming in from XYZ. And I think it's important when you look at that, look backwards, and I need to get here. This is where I want to be. And then that's how we've done it.
I would say,
to pull on that thread for 1 second.
Yep.
So you just released a cookbook, right? Or recently. Was that a strategic move to bring in additional revenue stream? Was that just complementary?
Yes,
or
absolutely, because merch is a low-hanging fruit for most of us. Merch is like, you're going to sell a few t-shirts, people are going to come to an event, they're going to buy, and it's not a lot of money. But the cookbook did a couple of different things. One, it was a bigger gain because it was $50 a piece, but they're gorgeous. The other part was it got everybody involved. So there were a whole bunch of chefs and people in the community that we said, hey, lend your recipe to this. And so you can be part of it. So we now naturally just spread our wings to form a new community. And then on top of it, as we start to sell it, now it's bringing recipes from community to a new community. So yes, I mean, all the things that we try to do and taking steps we're thinking in advance of what we need to do down the road, that plan of, hey, we need to hire people. So what are we going to do to help make these to that inroad?
And Nicole, from where I sit, from someone who's frequently advising from a financial standpoint, I think your question is one of scale, which is, there's the chicken and the egg, right? Which is, I need to hire into this role so that I can scale.
Yeah.
And that's always going to be the trick. I think that when we're talking about capital, it's making sure that you have that runway to be able to show that that additional expense of a hire is actually adding and performing to the bottom line. I think that's I've always find that as a tricky moment where you say, okay, this brings a value into it. Also, from my experience with the nonprofits that we work with, the very first thing that happens with an early hire is freeing up your time, and that's so it's getting some of the administration out of your workload so that you can spend a little bit more time on the mission and on the fundraising side of things.
So for us as an organization, we operate 24/7. So we really didn't have a choice in the sense of scaling and seeking revenue. A quick story for us is that I was transitioning from a quasi-state position. And I received a grant for $10,000, and I decided at that point to quit my full-time job and jump into the organization full-time. At that point, we were a small enough program where I still had time to figure out everything. And I think one of the biggest challenges was the creation of systems and processes. So you have more people to come in. You're no longer, as Colin just said, you're no longer really carrying it all, but you need something that aligns with everything that you need to accomplish at the end of the day, where data for especially the work that we do is one of the most important things. It's hard to say I'm having this conversation right now with my board of like, do I hire a development person or do I hire a finance assistant? They're both important, especially when it comes down to an audit. But I think when we hit that place of I can no longer carry it all, and I think Jesse hit the nail on the head too. Nonprofit, we're burning out very quickly, and so you hit that place where you really don't feel like you have a choice. For us, we don't and we can't do a lot of advocacy where we have state contracts. And so it is beneficial to us, for me, to be able to step out and do some of the things that as a nonprofit, we are just not capable of doing with the contracts that we have. But as a CEO and a founder, we had to make that decision very early on, or my burnout would have happened a lot sooner because we do the merch. I have written a book. We have done all the things possible to make people also just aware of who we are as an organization. And I'll tell you, Nicole, as everyone tells me, the most important part of your role as a CEO is being out in the community so people know why they should support you, because you're going to know the story better than anyone else involved.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I think what, like Colin said, like number one, you're the most important person in the organization because you have to be like the visionary and the director and coordinating it. And so, in terms of hiring decisions, is this going to free up my time? Especially it's that sort of box of like what you're doing that you're not good at and you hate, and transitioning to like what you're good at and can do. So sort of outsourcing the stuff you're not good at, can't hate, or sometimes you'll reach like a level of like, okay, I need somebody that's operations minded, engineer minded. I feel like because we came from all volunteers to that, and it just became a certain spot where the expectations for volunteers and then my ability to say this was not done to a certain capacity, I needed to hire people for that, right? Like once the expectations reach a certain amount, it becomes sort of beyond the threshold. But it's also fortunate because if you already have volunteers, it's sort of the perfect way of like they're already passionate, they're already showing up, right? You can kind of see who's good at like attention to detail kind of stuff. And for me, it's just my relationship with the volunteers of like, hey, if you help us out when I have the ability, I will pay it forward to you. And so we've been able to stair step like their salaries of, okay, I know this isn't on a full-time salary, but it shows that, hey, I'm working my ass off to like help you out. And so slowly but surely we've been able to get it. And then it's strategical hires, right? Like, hey, I need somebody that's operations minded. I can do some of this other stuff. Okay, now I need this person because that's really like dogging me right now.
Jesse, does that come into your fundraising? You've raised a good amount of capital. Is that part of the pitch? Is that you need to scale that way? How do you connect those two dots with donors?
Well, I was going to say to Nicole too, it can't like if you have like a certain donor, sometimes they like the very specific ask of like, hey, I could really use this person here. And if you're helping to pay would you be open to paying like their salary for a year or this person? Sometimes like donors like that very specific kind of ask. It depends on the donor too. Like I've had cases where in grants we're like, hey, we want to hire another person, and the again, this is the education of like, oh, well, can't your other team just do it? Just pay them a little bit more, and it doesn't work that way. Some again that are more operations minded. It's hard on a bigger grant. Yeah, I guess there's some hires that are like understandably scalable. Like for us, we do veteran services, so we need coaches and all this kind of stuff. So inherent in ramping up. But if I say to certain people, hey, I want to hire this specific operations person, sometimes that can be a little bit trickier conversation. Again, it's sort of this like show us results, but the operations, I don't know, for whatever reason, the operations cost is always a tricky conversation with a lot of people. Some are more understanding of it.
Sandy,
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to kick over to you a little bit because I feel like we've been hovering around scale and finance, and you guys are now in I don't know how many different states. I'll let you speak for yourself, but geographically, you guys have become much larger. Yeah, how do you build that scale?
Yeah, so we're in 26 states, and when I look back, and actually in preparation for this, I looked back and just kind of traced the personnel costs and the number of hires over the last few years. And actually, we haven't hired a ton of people. I think our personnel costs have gone up, but that's been a function of inflation. It's been a function of promotions and the fact that, thankfully we have pretty high retention. So people stay with us longer, have higher salaries over time. But I think the pivotal point was when we really latched on to partners to do this work in particular states. And there are two types of partnerships that are really, really important to us in our sustainability. One is our ability to leverage law firms to provide pro bono assistance, be partners in our work. But one of the things they do is advance litigation costs for us. And so that helps tremendously with cash flow. And one of the key costs that they advance is actually the cost of experts, which is one of the most expensive aspects of running a litigation campaign. And so we have that money up front. Some firms get reimbursed once we collect a fee. Other firms get reimbursed and donate much of that back to us. But it has allowed us to bring more cases over time. The other thing is we've thought really carefully about local partnerships. We can't set up shop in every state. We can't set up an office that's too capital intensive. But we have relationships with advocates in those states who see CR adding value to what they're doing. And so we talk about those value propositions, we form partnerships, then we're invited into the states and they join us as co-counsel, they join us as advocates behind the scenes, but they open doors in the particular state and they connect us to the right people there. That has been huge. The other part of it is thinking about our advocacy as a portfolio. With some high risk elements in certain states, some that we know are low risk, so that if the high risk doesn't pan out, we at least have this aspect of our portfolio that's very low risk. So being really, really careful about risk management in our mission and where we go, and even being more narrow in our approach in particular states. In the past, we would do a kitchen sink lawsuit. We would challenge every aspect of the child welfare system, and that would take more time. It would take more resources. What we learned to do was to be more narrow in our approach, and then in the actual settlement, we can leverage the settlement discussions to get some of the key things that weren't really part of the lawsuit, but now because we're building a relationship, when we're talking to the states, we can actually add that to our ask as well. But partnerships have been really, really key for us in scaling.
Nicole, two things to kind of to touch on what Sandy went. One is, well, and this is actually a little more broad. It's my understanding that you're running two organizations. One is your own venture-backed startup. One
Yes.
is the nonprofit side of things. I'm kind of curious. One, is there tension between those two things, and how do you balance that out? You're obviously thinking about hiring on the nonprofit side. You're doing these things, and then in your other side, which is your venture-backed startup, which you can explain yourself how these two things intertwine. How do you find that tension between each other? And is there a natural partnership? Is there or potential for partnership, like Sandy said, either between your two organizations or additional organizations outside?
Definitely partnership opportunities. I would say I haven't found any tension. specifically because the company is provider focused and not patient focused, so there is no overlap there. But the community as a whole, there's an overlap. So when I'm going to, from a personal standpoint, when I'm going to conferences, physician conferences or patient conferences, and just engaging with the community, it's benefiting both, or policy meetings is benefiting the overall endometriosis mission. So it's networking for the nonprofit and also networking for the company. But I wouldn't say there's any tension because, and that was a conscious decision I made is on the business side because of running a nonprofit to not profit off of patients on the business side, but to specifically like my customers are hospital systems and doctors' offices. So it's at least different there, where the nonprofit is patient focused. And I see turning the nonprofit. I definitely want to build the company out first. That's definitely like my priority right now from a personal standpoint, and keep the nonprofit volunteer base for as long as we can. But once the company is up, in terms of like the overlap, once the startup is active, I only started it in February, active and profitable and in a good space. I would love to take a lot of that money and pour it into like donate back into the foundation so that we're still participating and helping women in the community.
On that note, Chasen, you and I have talked, and you have some very grand plans to open up. I think you mentioned 20. Is that the right number?
Yeah.
Of kitchens.
Yeah.
As you are thinking of scale and thinking of planning and around finance, what is your approach right now to lay that groundwork? And then also to touch on what Nicole says is that, albeit they're the same arm, you do have a different revenue stream of coming down the line, which is the revenue from the store as well. Maybe touch on
Correct.
that. Yeah.
Well, I think Jesse and other people have hit on this, that collaborations and partnerships are key, and looking for people that align with your mission, vision, and purpose. And it's not just about the money, but it's about what they do. We've partnered with Waring, which is a organization that does different cooking equipment. And we've received over $10,000 worth of equipment from them to deck out this new kitchen that we're building. We couldn't do the work without people like that in place. And that comes from building relationships. And, as I said earlier, maybe off camera, that, I'm an introvert that's socially awkward. So getting into those rooms and having those conversations, it only helps me personally get out of my comfort zone, but also helps the organization, because the more I tell my story and why building TKs matters to me personally, but to our organization and what we're doing, you can see people's eyes light up. They get it. And I want to build those relationships so that we have more collaborations, like with Waring, Rationale, our bank. And that's what helps us do the work and set the tone for building out these places. Nicaragua happened by accident. I mean, literally, I met a guy through a networking group that I'm part of, and I've been part of even before the nonprofit came about. And I went to his fundraiser and I wrote a small check for my wife and I, and we just started talking about what we could do together. And the next thing I know, we're doing an impromptu, fundraising event in New York City. And then I'm spending 21 days on the ground building out a kitchen in Nicaragua. I think it's going with the flow of the doors that open. I'm really in tune now with trusting my gut. As a person who's lived on the streets, I trust my gut. I look people in the eye, I shake hands, and I try to really look for the opportunities where we can collaborate and we can have long-term relationships. And that's how we end up being able to build these kitchens and do the work. It's through that, which has been a huge part of what we do.
I'm just curious, Nicole and Jesse, you guys are dealing with issues that are not in the immediate consciousness of people, right? how do you make the pitch when these issues don't directly affect some of the people you're talking to?
Yeah.
And what's kind of the long-term vision for their participation so that they feel really tied into the mission?
I'd say my immediate network in terms of fundraising too has been bringing awareness to, I mean, people I've already met that have endo, like majority of our donors have endo or somebody close to them has it. But just through my own like personal experience and sharing that and getting that out there, people that I know in my own network who have never heard of endometriosis, suddenly like, oh, this is a horrible disease. Like, please share more. And I find it easy once I get the story out there. It's just bringing it to people's attention. But endometriosis, luckily in the past 3 years specifically, is getting a lot more press and awareness out there. So more and more people actually reaching out to me that I never would have thought to approach for fundraising are coming to me and saying like, wait, this is what you have? Like, I want to be involved. How can I help? So the timing right now is a good time for endometriosis in terms of the awareness levels. But yeah, definitely in terms of reaching this out to people who are not already aware. There is a lot of just educating people on how common this disease is. It's not a rare disease just because many people don't know about it doesn't mean the disease is rare. A lot of people have it and don't even know it. You can also have the disease and be asymptomatic. So it's a very common disease. It's really just raising the awareness of what it is, life with the disease is like, what treatment looks like, what we need the funds for in terms of research and policy advocacy and helping women access the right surgery.
Yeah, and for us, representing veterans, there's not actually that many degrees of separation. Like a lot of people have some sort of connection to the veteran community, even though it's, relatively small from a population standpoint. But it's also, I mean, like for the veteran community, we're sort of fortunate to be in the US because we also have branches in, say, Canada and England, and those countries tend to be much less centered on veterans and all this kind of stuff. So it's much harder actually to raise money or to get people to pay attention to veterans issues in other countries. Whereas the US, it's very patriotic, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but at the very least, like it is there is a lot of support for the veteran community, and there is this sort of baseline understanding that there is this group who have put their lives on the line for the rights or the ability for the rest of the population. So I think it's just keeping the story simple from there, is because most people don't. People assume that the government is taking care of the veterans, right? And so they inherently want to or are supportive of it, but then it's just keeping the story simple, and then the relation, because it's a veteran family too. So the military spouses, the kids that are affected by being in a PTSD family. A lot of people know the trope of the Vietnam vet coming and how that has sort of generational trauma coming down. And so it's and then just the other story of these people are they're amazing. They put themselves in risk, and they're also amazing people. These traumas are preventing them from being back in society and the economy, and they can really add benefit to it. So it's keeping these simple stories simple that a lot of people can relate to. Going on their natural sort of wanting to help veterans and wanting to resolve the issue. And then for instance, sometimes a veteran spouse spokesperson might be a better fit for a donor, or a different demographic of a veteran might be a better fit for this. Or oftentimes it's like the special ops GI Joe is what you want to go to in certain like fundraisers, right? Because that's what people see in the movies and all this. So it's really sort of knowing your donors and audience and what might connect to them. And I think that's the same thing across nonprofits. It's what's going to connect most to them, and being creative about that. And then from the political side, we are also not afraid to use that veteran voice as leverage. Like whether or not a congressperson really supports the troops or not, they have to at least come out and look like they do. And so I have no qualms with just being like, hey, you said you support the troops. I'm giving you this on a platter. So, you want to actually speak up about it. Otherwise, we're going to call you out, right? And that can be pretty politically hard for them. And so people like with us, we are fortunate because this is a broader mental health issue. It's actually there's many much larger populations that have PTSD than veteran populations, but because the veterans have that sort of angle point, we can also work with other groups that just want a better mental health system, but understanding that veterans are one of the most effective advocates and messengers of this specific topic. And so that's also a conversation we can have with donors of, veterans might not be your number one thing to donate to, but look how effective we can be to also get your thing across the finish line.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quickly, and I'll turn it over to Colin for questions. As you scale the organization, as you grow, I think really important to think about a really effective communications function, depending on where you are, right? Like we've had to do a lot of narrative change work, especially around why kids come into the system. I think a lot of people assume that most kids who go into the child welfare system have been abused, when the reality is 70% of kids come in because of neglect. Which is often conditions of poverty. And so educating donors around that has been really important. And that has drawn a whole new set of supporters who care about family integrity. But that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't invested in the communications arm to do that type of work. So Colin?
Yeah, well, I want to get to bring everyone else who's here on camera in a few minutes. But a quick question for all of you. You can choose how to answer this as well. What's your biggest financial mistake you've made? What's the one that you maybe a hard lesson learned? I'll let you whoever wants to raise their hand first to share that. Go.
I'll go. I mean, this is embarrassing, but I have to own it. So, when you are under a certain threshold of $25,000 if you haven't raised more than $25,000, you can fill out what's called a postcard. So you don't need a CPA. You don't need, you just, answer a few questions. You send that in. I got really bold after the first 2 years that, this is going to take off this year because we're doing X, Y, and Z and our budget and our plan and everything. And we're going to get these grants. And I'm always, the glass, we can do this. And so we got a CPA for the second year we were in. And we got to that point, but we could have just filled out a postcard and been okay. Or even done an EZ, which is a lot less money, a 990 EZ form, which is less time, less effort, less money. But no, I decided I needed the whole shebang, the full 990, the whole deal. And so a lot of money spent on things that we didn't need. And that was my biggest, sometimes you just have to go with the flow of it and just see what's really happening and be realistic about what's there. And so and the reason this matters is because once you do a full 990, you can't go back to doing all right, next year I'm going to do an EZ once you've done that, you would cripple yourself if you go backwards to donors and grants and people. Now they see you in this light and they're like, okay, we expect you from here on out to do a full 990 and the audits and everything. So we set ourselves up for that financial responsibility because I came to it too soon. So I would, especially for younger nonprofits, I say it all the time, learn from the mistakes we've made and the things that you can decide for yourself, what's right for you. But that would be mine.
Anyone else want to share a mistake?
I'll jump in because mine is closely related to Jason's, which is I kind of underestimated where we were. And I thought, okay, this is easy enough. We did the 990 in the first year. And I was like, kind of cutting it close to tax season. And it's like, all right, we're going to do this. It's time to do our taxes. Looking at the numbers and realized that we needed to file a complete 990. And we had to hire an auditing firm. And we had to bring all the documentation together and go through that entire process and then file also an extension for our taxes because we had cut it so close, thinking that we're going to take care of this internally. And so for us, I would say for me, because I was the one kind of facilitating. It's like we hadn't hit that place at all in the back of my mind. And it felt like overnight we became $1 million organization. And I had no idea because I was just involved on the day to day at the ground level. It's like completely unaware of what was happening in the sense of we hadn't hit that place. I would say second to that is kind of what I alluded to earlier is we need to set that money aside, whether it's 5% or 10%, preparing for those rainy days.
I'd say quickly, just bad hires, and this was just early on, is you have to, motivation doesn't lift everything that you need. And it was really more of a process of me knowing what I needed and knowing specifically what the organization needed. So it's almost this learning experience of, it's not one person. Certain people are better for jobs, and certain people are not good fits for that. And so, just that learning process, and then also, keeping people on longer than, sometimes you have to just let people go, and that's always the hard conversation.
I think that is every organization.
Yeah.
So yes, that's always a challenge for sure. We're coming into the last 10 minutes, which this has flown by. To this group, is there anything we want to touch on before, or does anyone else want to share a tidbit before we invite people to turn on their cameras and ask questions? I'm sure we could keep going forever. So on that note, if anyone who is joining us wants to pop in and ask some questions, I see in the chat, Bill, you just popped in a question a few minutes ago. If you want to come on camera, or I can ask on your behalf if you want me to bring that in. Yep, there's Bill. Great.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry I arrived late, but just after Jesse spoke, I just wanted to pop that comment in as a reaction to what he had spoken to with the ability to tailor the presentation to the group. And I'm not sure if you know, Chris Holshek is involved in a lot of Orange County veterans groups. It's the one that I heard that from. The other thing that I just heard mentioned was we can't forget that nonprofits are businesses, and you can benefit from any business coach, from any business advice online. It's critical that you see it as a business and not as some sort of charity. It may be a 501c3, it may be a C6, whatever it is, but it is in the end a business.
Yeah, I think that from where I sit, Bill, as someone who looks at spreadsheets all day long, I think that's the sustainability of the business itself really depends on some of that rigor, which is making sure that there is enough funding to carry on.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, Bill, is like I do think it's important, even though it's a business, and I agree with a lot of what Jesse said around this. There are things peculiar to nonprofits, but even though there's a business, I think you want to get to a point where you can take some reasonable risks to advance the mission, right? And businesses do that all the time, right? And so you want to take some risks that don't put the organization in jeopardy, but we want to build the resources, build the infrastructure to be able to do that. And sometimes explaining that to donors, explaining that to foundations is hard, right? Because something unproven, sometimes they want you to do, other times they're like, no, but you're doing great here. Why are you going into this? And so we make those types of decisions too. But those are decisions that businesses make too.
To the group, what's one thing that's precious? We talk about what's the one thing that you would never cut? What's
Yeah, for me, and this goes into the you're a business, but there are other mission-driven prerogatives as well, is the voice of lived experts and creating space for them to shape policy and shape the work is really, really important. And I'll tell you that work is not completely covered for whatever reason, mainly because we focus on the big systemic change. We haven't covered it, but we use our general operating funds to do that because it's so important. And I think it makes us the organization we are. It helps us target programs to where they're really needed. And so I would never cut the support we provide those young people and in the form of stipends, sometimes fellowships, other things, so that they're able to help us with the work we do.
Sandy, there's a question in from Amanda about succession planning. And I think you're the one person here who did not found the organization that they run. How did that come about? And what could we learn as this broader group of founders right here about that? And you know, how did the legacy of your predecessor carry on through you? And what is your plan?
Yeah, I think honestly, I came on to Children's Rights as Chief Operating Officer because there had been very little succession planning. And there was this thought that having a strong number two who could possibly be a successor was really, really important because that wasn't there. And so because my genesis in this position was tied to succession planning in some ways, right? I think about it all the time. And I'm constantly trying to develop people within the organization who can take that mantle. And I'm pretty confident that at least, and there's two aspects of it, at least on the emergency succession plan, if I were to get hit by the bus, that usual scenario, right? I think we'd be fine. On the long-term succession, still working with some people that I think can get there for sure internally, but also really important to think about external folks that you're in contact with who can come into the organization and building those relationships, because ultimately it's up to the board to make the hire. And I think my responsibility is to make sure that the board has as many options as possible, right? And some of those are people within the organization. Some of those are people that I trust, who I know believe in the mission and do good work and are prepared to lead an organization like Children's Rights.
I think that's really helpful. I think, from everyone here, when you're living it, you don't sometimes are able to take that perspective, and you were brought in with that perspective of this is supposed to outlive the founder. This is supposed to be bigger than the person who sparked the idea, right? And I think that's a very important thing. I want to open this up just to the group, and anyone else that's wants to ask a question, please come on camera, interrupt me, join in. One thing we didn't touch on, which I know from my conversations with Nicole, but I also know that Sandy, this is a big part of your organization, and Jesse, I've got to imagine it's huge with yours as well as others, is the policy side of things. Nicole, maybe you can just touch on for a second about, your involvement literally in DC and meeting with lawmakers and trying to advocate on.
Yeah, so our goal is to get the CMS reimbursements to give a new code for excision, and then also with a higher reimbursement rate. Because right now there technically is a code for the surgery. It's just the reimbursement rate is so low that the physicians who can actually do the surgery can't use it because it's not equal to the complexity and the time that it takes for the surgeons to actually get surgery. So we're working with the AMA to get a new code established, and that's a process with the CPT code application, and then also working with CMS so that once we get that code to establish a higher reimbursement rate. So a lot of the beginning process was just presenting our case, getting all the data on the economic burden of the disease, the scientific based data on how excision surgery is the gold standard and why it needs to be reimbursed properly, how it's different than the other surgical process that they use, which is an ablation, and that's what the code is really for, and that's reimbursed probably for ablation, very low, but excision, more complex, has to be higher. So it's really just presenting that case with all the science, all the data, the economic data as well. That took about a year and a half, just consistent meeting with CMS and HHS, and now we finally have them on board, and now we are working with Congress to help them help us put more pressure on CMS and HHS, make this higher priority, and then working through that process of the application with the AMA. So a lot of different moving parts, but when it comes to Congress specifically, I find it's a lot of just polite persistence and just consistently following up. We'll go to DC, have a lobby day, have one meeting. One example is we're working with them with Representative Nikema Williams' office in Georgia on getting endometriosis and adenomyosis listed on FMLA. Because you can get disability for endometriosis, but it's very difficult and then it's very easy to get taken away. And we just need something as simple as getting the disease listed on the FMLA website. So I'm not even asking for any money. But that's the Department of Labor's sector. So that representative office is writing the letter on our behalf. We're sending it on our behalf. We wrote it. And even though we had a meeting, great, here's all the info. They said they would submit it. And then it's just following up via email and following up, not getting any responses. And then having another lobby day, following up in person, like, oh, this got lost in the shuffle. So happy you came back. And then it actually got submitted that following week. So I find it's just a lot of, obviously they're so busy. I can't even imagine everything that comes across their desk. But just that polite persistence of like, this is the issue, consistently following up on it. And just like developing relationships with these people, honestly, so that they want to help you.
Well, believe it or not, we are at time. Jason had a great question in the chat. I'm sorry we're not going to get to it, but I want to encourage everyone who joined today to connect with each other. We will share the recording of this as well. And I want to make sure that this is hopefully the beginning of a little bit of a network. If you have joined this and you've heard something interesting, reach out to any of us that group, and hopefully we can help each other out. I think to Nicole's point, we are all need to be persistent in our causes. So hopefully we can all lift each other up and move along. I appreciate everyone who joined today. Panelists, thank you guys very much. That went by really fast. So I hope we can do it again soon. So thank you all very, very much. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and please stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
thanks for putting
everyone.
this together, Colin.
You're welcome.
you.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Tyson.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jesse. And thanks, Sandy. Bye, guys.
Bye.